a good sign. This is the Economic Workforce Development Organizational Meeting. We will have just a couple of motions and take care of that business, and then we'll move forward with our hearing. I'll recognize my Vice Chairman, Senator Suber, for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to elect Senator Berry as Secretary of the Committee.
Do I have a second? Second. Do I have a motion to close the nominations? So moved. All in favor of Senator Berry, say aye. Aye. All right, opposed? The ayes have it. Congratulations. Senator Suber.
I move to adopt a quorum of 6 members, a majority of the committee, as sufficient quorum to proceed with business.
You have heard the motion. Any discussion, any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion will carry. Senator Suber.
I move to adopt the rules of the Senate as the committee rules of procedure, with the exception of a motion to reconsider may be disposed of on the same day as it's entered.
Okay, you've heard the motion. And in addition to that, participation with committee meetings via Zoom is certainly encouraged. If you're not able to be here, you can participate. We'll allow questions if so, but you cannot vote via Zoom nor be counted present for that day. Any questions as relates to the motion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? That motion will carry. All right, this afternoon, thank you all for coming. This is committee meeting number 1 for me. So if I mess something up, one of you guys let me know and we'll get it right. But I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of build on the work that's been done in the past 4 years. Senator Parker had chaired this committee the last 4 years. There is a lot of change, as most of you know, in the workforce world. As Accelerate was created, we will hear from them later today, and that we've tried to focus on things that will carry Mississippi forward as we look for economic development, because every time there's an economic development opportunity, one of the number 1 concerns is labor. So I appreciate, number 1, the foundational work certainly that Senator Parker and I know Leah and many others in the Lieutenant Governor's office and have put together. We've seen things such as MFLEX come forward that offer some straight line tax credits to allow growth. But one of the biggest things that have been facing the state, and at least it gets the most press because I'm hearing it from our leadership, from the governor's office, Lieutenant Governor, the speaker, and also the state economist who we've invited today to talk to us quite a bit about our labor force participation rate. I know that that is something that is constantly being inquired of from businesses in our communities and what we can do to combat that. So, Mr. Miller, thank you so much for coming today. He is our state economist, and I will turn the floor over to you to give us a kind of some guidance. I know you have made some remarks recently as it relates to workforce participation, and let you say kind of what you want to there in the general state of economic development, how that impacts it, and then of course we'll leave some time for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Sparks. I appreciate the opportunity to address this committee today. I will discuss the labor force participation rate and why it is important, why it is low in Mississippi, what has happened to the rate in the last 2 years, and I will conclude with a brief mention of potential approaches to increase the rate in Mississippi. As I'm sure members of the committee are aware, Mississippi has had one of the lowest labor force participation rates in the country for many years. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has compiled monthly and annual data on labor force participation rates by state back to 1976. By my determination, on an annual basis, the labor force participation rate in Mississippi has never ranked higher than 43rd among all states over this period. Furthermore, in each year since 2013, the annual rate for Mississippi has ranked 49th among all states, besting only West Virginia. In 2022, the labor force participation rate for Mississippi was 54.9%, in contrast to the 62.2% rate for the United States. So why is a low labor force participation rate a concern? A 2018 Congressional Budget Office report notes that a lower labor force participation rate is associated with lower gross domestic product and lower tax revenues, as well as larger federal outlays because people who are not in the labor force are more likely to enroll in certain federal benefit programs. This same report also finds that greater labor force participation is associated with higher tax revenues because the number of employed people and therefore the number of people paying income and payroll taxes tends to rise. I roughly estimate that if the labor force participation rate in Mississippi had been the same as the US rate in 2022, the state's real GDP would have been around 10% larger and the size of the state's labor force would have been more than 13% larger. Now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates the labor force participation rate as the sum of the employed and the unemployed in the state divided by the state's civilian non-institutionalized population. Now, this population is all residents in Mississippi aged 16 and older who are not in the military or facilities such as hospitals, nursing homes, or prisons. There is no upper age limit on this population. When an individual moves from the ranks of the unemployed to the employed, or vice versa, the labor force participation rate does not change if the state's population remains the same. So therefore, the state's labor force participation rate can remain unchanged while the unemployment rate increases or decreases. The only way the labor force participation rate changes as the population remains the same is some number of individuals stop working or they stop looking for work, or some number of individuals, as we say, comes in off the sidelines and seeks employment. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates the labor force participation rate using the same survey data it uses to compute the unemployment rate from a survey of a sample of US residents. I have written at length since before and becoming state economist on the likely reasons Mississippi has a relatively low labor force participation rate. I say these are likely reasons because state level data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not indicate why respondents are not in the labor force. However, other research has identified a set of reasons why individuals may not participate in the labor force, and I will briefly identify which of these reasons I think apply to Mississippi. First, and I would argue this is probably foremost, is educational attainment. The Congressional Budget Office report that I mentioned earlier notes that in 2017, the labor force participation rate for men aged 25 to 54 with a bachelor's degree or higher was 9 percentage points higher than for men in the same age group without a college degree. The labor force participation rate for women of the same group with at least a bachelor's degree was 13 percentage points higher than for women in the same age group without a college degree. Educational attainment in Mississippi is lower than for the US as the share of the state's population aged 25 and older with at least a high school diploma in 2021 was 2.9 percentage points below the US share. In addition, only about 25% of Mississippians aged 25 and older held at least a bachelor's degree in 2021, compared to about 35% of the comparable US population. Second, disability substantially affects the labor force participation rate in Mississippi, as the share of the state's population with a disability is well above the share for the US. According to the Census Bureau, in the 2022 civilian non-institutionalized population, the share of residents of the state that had a disability and were not in the labor force was 15.9%. For the US, the share of individuals with a disability not in the labor force was 10.8%. The Congressional Budget Office report that I have mentioned says that in 2017, the most common reason men aged 25 to 54 give for not being in the labor force was illness or disability. I'll also note at this point that the population share of retirees in Mississippi does not appear to be a major factor in the state's relatively low labor force participation, in my view. According to analysis of census data by 24/7 Wall Street, the share of the state's population that was retired in 2020 was 14.8%, which was tied for 25th among all states, or right in the middle. Moreover, this share was less than in Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee, states that all had higher labor force participation rates. In addition, my examination of census data finds that the share of Mississippi's population in 2022 that was at least 65 years old was 16.5%, which was tied for 31st among all states, which would appear to corroborate that preceding analysis. As before, this share was less than in the neighboring states of Alabama, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Moving on, thirdly, based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, race likely impacts labor force participation rates in Mississippi. Among the prime working age population of individuals ages 25 to 54, whites and Asians have higher labor force participation rates than African Americans and Hispanics. African Americans aged 25 to 54 made up 4.9% of the US population in 2021, compared to 14% of the Mississippi population. So the larger share of African Americans in the prime working age population for Mississippi compared to that of the US likely explains part of the state's lower labor force participation rate. I will point out that the Congressional Budget Office report mentions differences in labor force participation across racial groups, but does not give any potential reasons why these differences exist. Fourth, Mississippi's prison population, while not a part of the state's non-institutionalized population, and therefore is not a part of the calculation of the labor force participation rate, probably still affects and impacts the rate. According to the National Institute of Corrections in 2020, the state rate of incarceration in Mississippi was 584 individuals per 100,000 people. This rate ranks 6th among all states and compared to the US rate for 2020 of 359 individuals per 100,000 people. Employers are less likely to hire someone with a criminal record, and employers are more likely to pay lower wages to previously incarcerated employees compared to other workers. Those two factors reduce the likelihood that previously incarcerated individuals will participate in the labor force. Finally, research from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco specifically finds that about half or more of the decline in prime age participation since the year 2000 is attributable to the disappearance of manual labor positions in manufacturing and other industries. These positions include skilled and semi-skilled workers or jobs centered in the manufacturing industry, which I believe are particularly relevant to Mississippi. In 2000, more than 19% of payroll employment in Mississippi was in the manufacturing sector. In 2022, this share was less than 13%. Improvements in technology have replaced many of these jobs, as well as the dissemination of technologies to countries with lower labor costs. In my opinion, the retreat of these jobs over the last 25 years, particularly in the manufacturing sector, likely accounts for some portion of the decrease in labor force participation rate in Mississippi over that same period. The preceding explanation of labor force participation rate hopefully will structure the remainder of my discussion, which is about the most recent labor force participation rate for Mississippi reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In December, the rate for Mississippi was 53.8%, the lowest among all states. Moreover, in monthly data for Mississippi reported by the Bureau back to 1976, only 3 other months have had lower rates: April, May, and June of 2020, which was at the onset of the pandemic. The pre-recession peak of the labor force participation rate in Mississippi occurred in September 2019 at 56.3%. The rate in April 2020 was 53% and the lowest monthly rate for Mississippi ever reported by the Bureau, and only 0.8 of a percentage point below the December 2023 rate. After falling to the all-time low of 53% in April 2020, the rate ebbed and flowed, but slowly trended up until March 2022, when it hit a post-recession peak of 55.3%. Since that time, the rate has steadily trended lower, increasing in only 2 of the last 22 months. In contrast, the US labor force participation rate fell from a pre-recession high of 63.3% in February 2020 to 60.1% in April of 2020. The rate slowly increased until it too reached a peak in March 2022 of 62.4% and remained relatively flat for the rest of the year. However, in 2023, the US rate resumed its climb and reached a post-recession peak in November of last year of 62.8%. As of December, the rate for the U.S. stood at 62.5%. The U.S. labor force participation rate was only 0.8 of a percentage point below its pre-pandemic level in December, while the Mississippi labor force participation rate was 2.5 percentage points below its pre-pandemic peak. Now, in truth, even if the pandemic had not occurred, both the U.S. and Mississippi labor force participation rates would likely be lower in January 2024 than they were in February 2020, and that's because of demographics, having the baby boom generation in particular aging out of the labor force. By 2030, the youngest baby boomer will be at least 65 years old. However, in the previous 2 years of data that I've mentioned begs the question, why has the rate in Mississippi recovered much less? Mathematically, the explanation is between February 2020 and December 2023, the labor force in Mississippi decreased 3.5%, while the U.S. labor force increased 1.8%. The civilian population in Mississippi increased 0.4%, while the U.S. civilian population increased 3.2%. So the changes in the labor force for both the state and the U.S. were less than the changes in the population. Unemployment in Mississippi fell by more than 33,000 individuals between February 2020 and December 2023, a decrease of 45.4%. However, employment in Mississippi over this period decreased by almost 12,000 workers, a drop of 1%. U.S. unemployment, on the other hand, rose by 539,000 workers, a 9.4% increase. And U.S. employment rose by almost 2.5 million workers, an increase of 1.8%. So to summarize, although the labor force participation rates in both Mississippi and the U.S. were lower in December than in February 2020, the rate in Mississippi recovered less than the rate for the U.S. because the labor force in Mississippi decreased while the U.S. labor force increased. So what has happened to the roughly 45,000 workers who have left the Mississippi labor force since February 2020? I've asked myself that question repeatedly in recent months, and I've looked at census data for potential answers. As I mentioned, we know the U.S. and Mississippi populations are aging. Between 2019 and 2022, the share of the U.S. population age 16 and older that was at least 65 years old rose about 1%. The same share of the Mississippi population also rose about 1 percentage point over this period. And then looked at the prime working age population. As a share of the population age 16 and older between 2019 and 2022, the U.S. prime working age population fell about 1 percentage point. The Mississippi prime working age population also fell about 1 percentage point over this same period. Again, a similar change to the U.S. The absolute number of individuals in the U.S. age 25 to 54 increased 1% between 2019 and 2022. However, the absolute number of individuals in Mississippi age 25 to 54 fell 2.7%, a decrease of just over 30,000 residents. Now, because of the nature of this data, I can only hypothesize, but given that Mississippi's civilian population was essentially flat between 2019 and 2022, a shift in the composition of the state's population may very well account for much of the decrease in labor force participation over the last 2 years. Without the overall population growth experienced by the U.S., the tendency for labor force participation in Mississippi to fall intensifies as we have fewer residents in the age range where they are most likely to be working. I will note that neighboring Louisiana experienced shifts in population similar to Mississippi over that same period, but has not seen the subsequent decrease in labor force participation. Now, the comparatively smaller share of retirees and residents age 65 and older in Louisiana could be a potential explanation, but we need more information, more investigation to understand why the Mississippi and Louisiana differ in this particular measure. So how can Mississippi increase labor force participation? While a detailed discussion is beyond the scope of my comments today, I will briefly highlight some potential remedies. I will say at the outset that like most states, efforts to increase the rate are confounded by an aging population and declining birth rates. The most obvious answer is to address the primary causes I outlined earlier. However, these are long-standing issues, systemic issues like educational attainment and disability, and they take time to improve. Other recommended policies include public-private partnerships to increase the level of job training in the economy. These partnerships include consortiums between employers and post-secondary institutions. Accelerate Mississippi, which we'll hear from later, the state's current workforce development agency is already performing some of these functions through its district-based offices. Reforming occupational licensing requirements is another potential recommendation. And the Secretary of State's Tackle the Tape program to reform or remove occupational licensing requirements is an effort to address this issue. More options to provide for the care of children and other family members, such as flexible working arrangements, likely would increase the probability that prime working age adults enter or remain in the labor force. That should raise the participation rate. In a February 22 survey by Indeed Hiring Lab, 35% of female respondents and 18% of male respondents 25 to 54 cited childcare responsibilities as a reason they had not urgently searched for a job that month. This response rate reflects the importance of childcare options to prime working age adults. Flexible work arrangements could potentially help firms retain older adults as well. A number of workers chose retirement after the onset of the pandemic and have not returned to the labor force. These retirees, some of whom were early retirees, are one of the reasons the labor force participation rates in the U.S. and most states remain lower than the rates prior to the pandemic. The nonprofit research organization, the Conference Board, recommends firms allow older employees to use non-wage benefits that in most instances only full-time employees get to utilize in order to increase the desirability of employment. There are, of course, additional potential solutions to increasing labor force participation that I can get into here. In closing, while labor force participation is a long-standing issue in Mississippi, today I wanted to focus attention on the recent downward trend in the rate. In my opinion, the current rate of 53.8% is startlingly low given current economic conditions. While I'm admittedly hypothesizing, recent data appear to indicate the lack of population growth in Mississippi is exerting downward pressure on the rate. If so, a focus on the lack of population growth in the state is even more important as it is negatively impacting the economy. The state faces another challenge from population growth that will require public policy to address public or quality of life issues to generate a stronger, more sustainable labor force. Thank you for your attention. I conclude my remarks and we'll be glad to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Yes.
I've got a couple of questions. I will make sure and have the majority of your remarks, I think, are similar to a December 18, 2023 document that I pulled online. So I will have that for the committee because I know you covered a lot of ground.
I did.
In a short period of time. I want to ask a couple of kind of rapid fire questions, and then I want to deal with the definition of workforce participation rate.
Okay.
First of all, the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates this number. This is a federally generated number, not something you or anybody in the state of Mississippi calculates. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the Bureau of Labor Statistics does not inquire why someone is not in the workforce or not seeking work in their surveys.
That's correct.
So they offer zero assistance in why someone is not working.
Right.
Okay, so it's left up to us.
Yes.
Now, as to the definition, and I want to make sure I got this right, I promise not to pull out a whiteboard, but it's employed, which who's determining who's employed?
That is the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Do you know what definition they're using for employment?
Yes, sir. I will read that to you. Employed are all those who did any work for pay or profit during the survey week, all those who did at least 15 hours of unpaid work in a business or a farm operated by a family member, and all those who were temporarily absent from regular jobs because of illness, vacation, bad weather, labor disputes, and they were paid for the time off.
Okay.
So somebody on maternity leave or somebody on any of those other options, they're included in employment.
because part of my concern is we're going to attempt to define what the workforce participation rate is before we leave today. But we're also going to try to target what we can actually do to move the number. And if the number is what we're focused on, sometimes we miss the forest for the trees
Sure.
in the targeted training approaches. So by definition, employed is if I did any work for pay, 5 hours a week.
And it doesn't have to be paid work, it can also be unpaid work.
I understand, but the first category was any work.
Yes,
paid,
yes,
or 15 hours non-paid.
correct.
Okay, so I think in Mississippi, not only do we have a workforce participation rate issue, we have an underemployed issue because we get credit for moving the number if someone worked 5 hours and was paid. Is
Yes.
that the way you understand? Okay.
Yes, that's my
Now,
understanding.
the second number is the unemployed. And do they use MDES's definition of unemployed, or do they use their own?
They have their own. I can give that to you as
Okay.
well. It's all those who did not have a job during the survey reference week and made at least one specific effort within the last 4 weeks to make themselves available for work. It's all those, also includes all those not working and waiting to be called back to a job from which they had been laid off.
And that's the top number. We're dividing the state civilian non-institutionalized population into the employed, which is defined by someone who did any work for pay or up to 15 hours or 50, at least 15 non-paid, or was sick,
Mhm.
plus people who are making an effort to find a job who aren't currently working.
Correct.
All right, so the bottom number, when you say state civilian non-institutionalized population, that's everyone from 16 to infinity in age in Mississippi that is not incarcerated in a nursing facility or the military.
Right.
Is there any other category that is not counted in that number?
Hospital, nursing home, any of that is not included.
The reason being is that I'm not looking to chase a number if it doesn't better Mississippians, because some of our surrounding states may have a higher workforce participation rate of people who are either underemployed or working very limited amount.
Mhm.
Second thing is, as far as the working age population, if I'm not mistaken on the research I've done, the sweet spot, if you will, are men 25 to 54 have about a 90% workforce participation rate. Is that similar to stats you've seen?
That is the group with the highest rate. I know how high it goes. I don't know if I've seen it quite that high, but yeah, it is the highest rate.
And then I believe women in that age range approximately are 75%.
Yes.
All right. Are you aware that in Mississippi, we are 51st in adults age 26 to 34?
Adults 26 to 54,
26 to 34.
34.
We are 51st. Puerto Rico and Washington DC is calculating that number
51st in what?
in population,
In the number of those individuals.
sheer number of.
I had not seen that comparison, no.
So if we are lacking people in the highest percentage working age, it would in fact impact our participation rate, correct?
Definitely.
I realize that from an educational attainment standpoint, that people who have high school degrees or college degrees, et cetera, have a data point that show they are more engaged in the workforce participation rate, correct?
Correct.
But we don't know if they're underemployed or just employed.
No, I have not seen that.
And then as far as disability goes, the state of Mississippi at 18.7% ranks second in the country in disability population. Is that?
That sounds correct to me.
So to a certain degree, they've been keeping these numbers since 1976 on workforce participation. And we've had roughly the racial demographic that's been the same.
Yes.
We've been leading in disability, and we've had less 26 to 34-year-old people.
I believe so, yes.
And then the last thing, and I want to turn it over to the committee for questions. I understand the child care commentary that you made is ultimately there's a economics decision made that if it costs more for child care than the wage I'm earning, I'm gonna make an economics decision.
Yes.
That's what we would anticipate.
Yes.
I would open up any questions of the committee. Senator Johnson.
Where does our cost of living rank among the states?
It's generally near the bottom, among the lowest. The main reason for that is because of the cost of housing in Mississippi tends to be lower than most states.
And so it just requires less money to live in Mississippi.
Yes.
And I may have missed this just now, but we were figuring how to build the number of people that are employed. We divide that by what number exactly? The entire population? I missed what you said after that to get the workforce participation rate.
It is the sum of the employed and the unemployed divided by that civilian non-institutionalized population, which is
Okay,
everyone 16 and older, not in the military or some type of institution like a hospital or a prison.
great. Thank you.
I
Senator
just have
Robinson.
a point of clarification. The chairman has talked about population differences, but just for my information, if we're dividing the labor, the people working and looking for work by the population, what is the definition of the population of that denominator? Is it the population in Mississippi?
It is population in Mississippi, but it's that civilian population that I mentioned that is 16 and over.
Correct. So if we have the lowest number of working age people that the chairman referenced, would that be taken into account into the calculation is my question, I guess.
Yes,
Okay.
it would.
So then the number of people in that age range doesn't make a difference in our labor rate calculation. I mean, it makes, right?
Well, not on, as long as they're in the state and, on the bottom of that, but the effect would come in on the top part, not the bottom part. Yeah.
I got it.
Anyone else? One couple of follow-up questions. The 65 and plus population in Mississippi has grown about 24% since 2010 to 2021 was the data I ran across. Does that sound about?
It does. I had numbers between 2019 and 2022. It was up about 4 or 5%. So that sounds right.
And then finally, resident, I believe, is used in the state civilian non-institutionalized population. Does that mean Mississippi resident or United States resident? It would almost have to mean.
It is a Mississippi resident, yes.
So how does that factor into non-Mississippi residents who are working? Because they're working.
They are not supposed to be considered part of this. They're supposed to be considered as part of the state in which they live.
Okay, even if they're working in.
Right.
So if we cross-referenced the employed number from the Bureau of Labor Statistics with the Mississippi Department of Employment Security, we may get a different number.
Right.
Thank you. Thank
The
you.
payroll, I just want to explain, the payroll employment is what asks, when we get numbers by sector, like the manufacturing sector, for example, they ask firms about their employees. So that captures people who are working in Mississippi but may live somewhere else. And that's a separate number, which I didn't even get into today.
And I understand, based on the report I'd read of yours earlier, to move the number, literally people that are already in the equation are going to have to go to work that aren't working.
Right.
All right. The only other category would be incarcerated individuals who are not counted on the top or the bottom, that if they came out and were in fact employed, would move the number.
They would.
Is there any other population other than incarcerated that you're aware of that is likely to move into this number. We don't expect disabled to move into it. But they're counted, correct?
Correct.
So they are part of our population, but they're not likely to be employed or defined as unemployed.
That's right. There is some population, some portion of the disabled who are considered disabled who are working, but the vast majority of them are not.
And sometimes our state or federal rules dictate whether or not someone receiving disability can work and to what extent.
That's true.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Miller. I sincerely appreciate your time and presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, if you would come forward with whomever you would like to from Accelerate. Ryan Miller is Executive Director of Accelerate Mississippi. And I will give just a couple of brief comments before you begin, Mr. Miller. Again, this is an organization that was started 2 years ago, I believe, Chairman Parker, roughly almost 3. And one of the things I would love for you to do today, and I think you will, but is tell us what you do, but also tell us what you don't do, because there was language in the legislation that laid out what was expected of you. And then we have a tendency to do this in state government, that if we believe somebody's doing a good job with something, we just throw everything else at them. But thank you, and give us an update where you're at.
Well, Chairman, I appreciate that, and certainly understand that every day I leave the house, it seems I have more responsibility put on me even by my children. So I'm willing and always willing to rise to whatever challenge and responsibility that the legislature and the leadership of the state give us, as is my team, and we're grateful for the wise counsel and certainly direction and encouragement. I will take a personal point of privilege to thank Senator Parker, certainly for his leadership in the past years, bringing to life our organization and certainly providing wise counsel and good guidance and direction. Thank you for your leadership, and Chairman Sparks, we're excited and grateful for your willingness to dig in and certainly spend time. I also know that Representative Bell, Chairman Bell, is in the room, and grateful for his leadership and certainly all the ways in which he is helping us as an organization serve the state of Mississippi better. We are grateful. We know that you are busy, and we know that you have a great many topics facing the legislature this session. And so we don't take it lightly that you're spending this amount of time digging into something that's really very important, and certainly something that is near and dear to the hearts of the people that serve in the Office of Workforce Development. I thought it might be helpful today, if we can, to go through the following items of this, what we have kind of our proposed agenda. As Chairman Sparks had brought out, providing a little bit of a historical context as to who we are and what we were created to do, but also to differentiate between those things that we do and what we were not called to do. Because it is important to be able to distinguish where we have partnerships with other state agencies or entities who are more primely positioned to handle certain topics or issues, even if is an appropriate topic for us to have an opinion on. And so we will attempt to do that certainly in some of the historical context that I provide. I will then yield the floor to one of my colleagues, Dr. Courtney Taylor. She is our Deputy Director for Strategy and Programs, and she will provide an update on the various and myriad of programs that we have in partnerships with some of those entities in the state to show you our efforts at work and some of the progress that we've made over the almost 3 years of our existence now. At which point in time, she will also dive into specifically labor force participation. I know that Robin Stewart here is in the room, the Executive Director for MDES, and we are grateful for her partnership and her team as we are attempting to navigate this very complicated topic together, as they are primely positioned to speak to the nuance and some of the murkiness that often arises when we talk about the people in Mississippi who are or are not participating in employment. So we're grateful that they are here. But Dr. Taylor will continue on discussing our peeling the layers of the onion back as it relates to labor force, getting to the who is not in the labor force, getting into the where are they not in the labor force. But the more important question, which I believe, Chairman, you brought up just moments ago, is the why. And that is an important question that is not easily answered, but it's certainly one that we are attempting with our partners to answer, because we recognize that part of our responsibility is to create an environment where Mississippians would be more likely to jump into pathways that lead to promising careers. We want more people working in the state of Mississippi, bar none. But we also want more people working in better jobs. and being placed in career paths that we know are higher earning and have a higher trajectory for long-term success and financial stability. We'll then yield the floor to my other colleague here, Mr. Garrett McInnes. He's our Deputy Director for External Affairs, and he will talk about some of the funding sources, the federal and state dollars over which you've given us responsibility, giving you an update as to where we are with some of those initiatives, so that we are maximizing the likelihood of having a positive return on investment for the people of the state of Mississippi, and legislative updates. Some of the issues or topics that we are focusing on and zeroing in on this legislative session, in which we would certainly invite feedback, even kind admonishment if necessary, so that we make sure that we're focusing on the things that you, the legislature, think is the most important for the state. And then finally, I'll conclude with describing some of the obstacles associated with what we do, as well as some of the opportunities that I think we face in the short term and in the near future. So first of all, I know it might be hard to see this, but and we will, if we haven't already, we'll make this available to you so you can refer to this later. But this is certainly what we look at in these 6 boxes as being the mandate that you gave us when you created our office several years ago. This is actually language taken from the initiating legislation, the law that you passed, giving life to our office, and more importantly, giving us mission and direction. Comprehensive review of Mississippi workforce development efforts, the development of broad statewide development goals, designing broad guidelines for the delivery of workforce development, providing recommendation that's comprehensive and results-oriented that will allow us to measure whether we are achieving success as we define success together, to provide authority over some of these topics and initiatives that needed greater coordination, greater focus. And finally, working with industry along with educational partners to ensure that we have created that environment where more Mississippians are likely to step into a career path that we know will yield wonderful results for them and better stability and economic health as a state. This is the mandate you gave us. It is broad. Oftentimes, and it is important for me to bring this up, we are compared to our contiguous neighbors, Louisiana, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Alabama, and oftentimes compared to their organizations, AIDT in Alabama, Louisiana Fast Start in Louisiana, which are very good at what they do, but they are given a very narrow mandate. Their job is to provide customizable training to economic development projects. Economic development projects that we're familiar with that we saw last week, their job is to provide quick deployed workforce solutions to meet the needs of industry as they're coming to their respective states. Now, we were tasked to do that as well. And you can ask Senator Parker, that was certainly a part of what was created, or what was hoped for, the expectation when we were created. But we were also asked to look at much more as it relates to the often complex interwoven tapestry that we're calling workforce development. Now, there's some limitations to that. And my colleagues will be able to show and help delineate between our role and responsibility in that effort versus some of our other sister agencies and entities in the state, to assure that we are not duplicating nor being redundant in our efforts of workforce. You created a very broad mandate, and it was right, and it is good. It is a holistic approach that we believe is best for the state of Mississippi in getting down to the who, the where, and the why associated with the topic that we're discussing today. At this time, I would like to call forward my colleague, Dr. Taylor, for her to provide a programmatic update and to provide some insight into our work with the labor force participation rate. Courtney.
Thank you, Ryan. Glad to be with you all today. I'm just going to jump right into it. So I wanted to kind of set the tone for what we are responsible for as it relates to state dollars and some of the federal dollars that we have, just to kind of refresh everybody. The first one, obviously, is our Workforce Enhancement Training Fund, operated through our community college partners. It's about $20 million a year. This program has undergone significant changes to processes, including that colleges and companies now request funds based on a training plan. We have internal auditing through a third party that ensures money was reimbursed appropriately, close to when it's going out the door. We're still working to improve that. The key to this program is that all entities have a training plan that they apply for money on the front end. So that allows us to really understand at a deeper level where the money is going, why it's going there, and what the anticipated outcome is going to be. Now, unfortunately, humans make their own decisions, so they can run off at any time and do other things, but the goal is to get moving on that piece. On the Mississippi Works Fund, it's about a $5 million a year fund. We had about $17 million built up last year when we received full, control of that program. We spent the year kind of understanding how it had been utilized, how it needed to be utilized, and ways to improve the efficiency. And all of these programs, we're trying desperately to decrease the administrative burden. So you'll learn that it is challenging to run money, or at least I've learned that. But this fund had about a $17 million backlog, and we awarded about $6 million last year, and we anticipate awarding about $10 million this year. And this is in support of economic activity, economic development activity for your small to medium-sized companies traditionally. And the goal here, or the key for this program, is that we are using the funding to create jobs or enhance existing workforce training opportunities when companies need support for adjustments in their processes, equipment, things like that. They're needing to reskill their employees to handle the changes that they are going through. Moving on, we have our Career Coach program, which right now sits at $12 million a year. We currently have 177 career coaches in 187 schools. We are going forward with the estimate that we need approximately 240 coaches to meet the what we are just calling the basic demand to get one in every school. We are realistic and we understand there are challenges to this, but that's kind of how we're moving forward. Also, outside of the state funding, even though ARPA is really, it comes through you all, so it is state funding, but we have approximately $90 million in American Rescue Plan Act fund. All but about 5% of that fund has been obligated. I should go back real quick to WET funds. We have obligated 100% of the dollars available in WET funds to date. So all that money is out the door. But American Rescue Fund, ARPA. These funds are challenging as we have to meet federal and state expectations, but they're incredibly beneficial. We have used these funds to increase the human capital infrastructure in Mississippi, like we have done with the other funds. And then we have a Department of Defense grant that we wrote with our partner MDES. It's $5 million over 5 years. And this was our first very, very specific sector for shipbuilding. So we've been focused on shipbuilding with that grant because that's what the grant wanted to fund, where we're increasing exposure, training for shipbuilding careers, modernizing legacy equipment, and then really working on heat mitigation technology. Again, that's just a small example, but all of these programs are designed to impact some area of the labor force participation, with WET Works and ARPA targeting adults primarily, who are looking to get into the workforce or are already in the workforce but needing to upskill. Having an available training infrastructure is critical to this. If we don't have available training programs, available seats in programs, things like that, people get discouraged very quickly. They're already fighting other things. So that's kind of where we focus some efforts there. We're working with wraparound supports and career coaches to engage directly with students and adults alike, to try to direct them towards these quality careers that they usually cannot see. They're behind walls, buildings. They don't understand what brand names mean in some situations. Some of that is just because of how communities or how companies communicate. Some of that is just general culture. But that's just kind of an overview of the programs that we operate right now. Where do I point? Okay, thank you. I'm not going to belabor this because economist Miller went through it, but I did want to show you kind of this one on the top left is the federal and the state unemployment rate. You can see they kind of go in concert. The bottom one is Mississippi's labor force participation rate. What I want you to see here is that this is a long-term challenge. This is not just the last 2 years, 3 years, COVID. We have faced this at times before. I think we all know that in our heart of hearts, and we know that, and that's kind of what we are working on every day. So if you go to the left side of the screen, it's December of 2004, where we had a 61% labor force participation rate. Fast forward to December 19, it's at 56, and then December of 23, it's at 53.8%. Our office has chosen to focus more on efforts that increase the numerator of the labor force participation rate, which includes the actual number of people employed, because frankly, it's easy to validate and address by county. The labor force participation rate is only available by state. And what we know in Mississippi is that opportunity is not equal across regions of the state. So we have spent a significant amount of time, and we continue this work's never done, but it's not done right now either. But we continue to dive into counties and regions, what we call ecosystems, to understand the different challenges, opportunities, things like that. And we know that we do have some opportunity problems in some regions, opportunity challenges, I guess I should say. So we want to focus on employment in Mississippi. It's just easier to understand. It's easier to affect, and not as easy to maybe manipulate. So again, going back to 2004, we had 1.237 million people employed in Mississippi. Our high water mark was 2008 with 1.26 million people employed. This number's erratic, as you can see. It's subject to recessions and a lot of different things. Prior to the pandemic, this was 1.212, and today we sit at 1.19 million people working, which is a difference of about 21,000. So that 21,000 is the number that we're focusing on, meaning we've lost 21,000 people out of the labor force. The reality is we may not get those people back. If they're sandwiched between taking care of grandkids and grandparents, they may never come back. So to meet that need, we have to go deeper into populations that maybe we haven't been as a state, and really understanding it. The other thing I want to highlight is the number of people considered to be unemployed during the last 20 years has also dropped in half, going from 88,000 in 2004 to today, we're about 40,000 unemployed. That does not count underemployed. Everybody has a different definition of underemployed, but you 100% have regions of this state where you have significant numbers of Mississippians underemployed in full-time jobs, not necessarily part-time jobs. We have gained 16 to 19-year-olds. We have gained 55 to 64-year-olds, which could indicate people are starting in the labor force earlier and maybe staying a little bit longer, or at least staying until retirement age in some cases. We know our workforce is getting older. This could be due to strong wages and low barriers. One thing we do have in Mississippi is low barriers to employment. That does not mean low barriers to employment in quality jobs. So there's some distinct things there we have to think about. One number that we don't discuss a lot is the numbers that just aren't popular. The Census Bureau estimates we have about 7,000 discouraged workers. These workers would not be counted in any percentages or any numbers anywhere. They're just running around, not working. Maybe they wanted to work. They couldn't figure out how to apply for jobs, or they had some kind of a skill deficiency. But those workers are vital that we get to. And we're working every day to get to those. We do have low credential attainment in Mississippi, which may be a function of opportunities. That is something we are examining right now with some of our data partners. By region to determine the quality of opportunities and the quality of educational attainment. Some regions in Mississippi have largely low wage jobs. So the realistic only way to correct that is to get more companies paying more money, and that is a long-term play. So I say all that to say, as we talk through and get into credential attainment, we do have 20,000 or 23,000 more Mississippians today with a bachelor's degree or above than we did in 2019. We have 22,000 fewer Mississippians with less than a high school diploma. So those are all good things. However, the workforce participation rate of people without a high school diploma has not budged in years. It still sits at about 33%. So when you start looking at places where we can go to impact people quickly and get them working, low educational attainment is a good spot, but it is a hard spot. And what we have seen from the federal funds is that the money has gone down every year for the last 5-7 years. So we do have challenges there in getting to those people. While our bachelor's degrees are growing, we still rank 47th in the nation for bachelor's degree attainment growth and 34th in associate's degree attainment growth. So the goal is still to increase those while we are working to increase opportunities like the one that was just announced. Ultimately, inducing humans to participate in a workforce that may not be suited for their lives where they live is challenging and takes everyone working together. To that end, we've worked diligently with our state and federal partners to craft legislation, strategies, and such to allow for success. This includes working across agencies to develop strategies. And I'm sorry if y'all can't see this, but working across agencies and organizations to develop strategies that work for Mississippi. We are currently in the finishing stages of what we're calling our comprehensive state strategy. This will be out next month. We'll be talking to y'all about it, or in March. We're working on a regional educational gap analysis to really start picking in on how many more numbers of people in what occupations do we need going to work to meet our existing need, but also to meet our expanding companies where they are and our new companies where they are. We are working with our friends at MDES on WIOA, our friends at MDE and MCCB on Perkins. We have a state mandated return on investment study that is underway. I guess I should say we're working on round 2 of that. And we're working to really nail down the K-12 industry certifications to make sure that the certifications that exist in our K-12 programs match opportunities available in the labor market. So as we talk about that, we're continuing to seek new resources that align with our comprehensive strategy, goals, plans. We just received a federal EDA recompete grant where we're focusing on Hattiesburg, Jackson, and Greenville for their prime age employment to work on plans to mitigate that gap and close the gap. And while we are doing this and tackling existing industry, we have been continuing to narrow the focus of our customized training arm to fill the gaps identified by prospective and existing industry. This is a mandate from you all for what we do. This process has not been easy, but it's been incredibly telling and valuable as we look to the future to ensure funding can get where it's needed, when it's needed, but also that we can recruit new entrants to the workforce and new residents vital to supporting our existing and new industries in Mississippi. So this is just kind of a little image that shows this is where we're going, and we're adding these things as we move on. I'm not the graphics person. I will leave that up to my colleague, Garrett McInnes.
Thank you. So just a little bit of housekeeping. This is a chart that shows direct funding through our office since inception. So this is almost 3 years worth of state and federal funding. And one of the things we were asked to kind of update you on was just the status of how these things are going. I'll start with ARPA because I know that y'all have some big decisions to make on ARPA over the next 90 to 115 days. We were given $88 million total in ARPA funding over the last 2 sessions, $60 million in the fiscal year 2023. We had that $60 million obligated within about 45 days of the fiscal year. And that money is moving quickly. I think all reports say that our money has been moving quicker than other state agencies as a whole. We fully expect to spend all of that. Those were in 3 buckets. There was $32 million that was allocated for either direct training, so capacity increase at community colleges or other training partners, wraparound services to, again, work directly with individuals across the state to help them find employment and long-term stability. $8 million was dedicated for the first major expansion of the career coaching initiative across the state, and $20 million for the Healthcare Infrastructure Act for the expansion of a school of osteopathic medicine. This past year, another $28 million was allocated for healthcare specific funding. As Courtney mentioned, all but a small percentage of that has been allocated. What I would like for you all to hear from us today is that you don't have to lose sleep, that our money will be spent, and it will be spent on things that impact Mississippi positively going forward. well before the deadline. We just received additional information after an inquiry from all our sub-grantees within the last 2 weeks. The vast majority of our money should be reimbursed. So not only spent, but reimbursed through the state this calendar year. In fact, I expect the majority of it by this fiscal year, by June 30th, but have no fear, we will have our money spent. And if you have additional money, even though Courtney may shoot me, we'll take it. The second piece that I want to update you on is actually state funding, WET funds, Mississippi Works funds, and the SWIB account, which is now sort of been transitioned over. Actually, I'm going to get one of. So in House Bill 588 last year, a couple of things happened. Number one, there was the creation of a K through 12 grant program. We will this week or early next be making awards for that initial K through 12 grant program totaling approximately $1.4 million. We received requests for nearly $10 million from high schools across the state. I say that to say there's an opportunity for the state if the state would like to take advantage of it. But we received almost $10 million in requests. We'll be making the initial awards for that K-12 grant program very soon. The second thing that happened in 588 I would like to point out is what you're holding in your hand. There's a new requirement that our office produce a quarterly report specific to the state funds we direct. WET funds and Mississippi Works funds, and now Career Coach funds. This is a pretty cool document. This has never existed in the state of Mississippi. When you created this office, I believe one of the main reasons that it was created was because of some research Senator Parker and Lieutenant Governor Hoseman's office did to identify the massive amounts of money that were being spent in workforce without any real knowledge of what was going on with those monies across the spectrum. Through the yeoman's work of some key team members of ours that are not here today, this report is the first time that you can kind of peel back the layers of WET funds to sort of see what's going on at the colleges on a really pointed level in a community, what industries are being supported. This report is posted on our website. It will be updated quarterly. You will be receiving these reports quarterly. I want to point out, because Courtney will point out to me that I forgot to if I don't, you'll see a bunch of zeros on the right column. That's because what you're looking at are allocations of dollars, but in Q1 of the fiscal year, the colleges have not requested reimbursement. So Q2, Q3, those numbers will start to fill in, and you'll see as the colleges pull down money from those allocations where they've already on the front end told us the training plans they're going to institute to support local community industry partners. A lot of questions in there. We are more than happy to sit with you individually if you want to talk about your local community, if you want to talk about what's going on as a whole. A lot of information there. I'm not going to get into all the details, but we're happy to do that. And then just to give you very high level what you should expect from our office during the legislative session this year and going forward. Number one, we're going to ask you, and sometimes we may ask you in legislation, but generally we're going to ask you to continue to have a sustained commitment to this grand experiment of our office, because we believe it's a model that is functional. It is built in a way that allows us to really move the ball down the field for Mississippi. And as we pointed out, it's a long play. And so the positive things we're seeing, we believe it's just the beginning. A lot of work to be done, but we're going to ask you to continue to support that effort to really focus and strategize what we're doing as a state through our office. The second thing is we're going to ask you for some additional support for increased accountability and tracking infrastructure. What does that mean? It means accounting and systems technology. We're working off of some really, really outdated systems right now. We inherited funds that were built on legacy systems. We were inheriting a lot of sort of figure it out without a lot of accounting sort of infrastructure. And so that's a need for our office and for our workforce system as a whole. We will be asking for increased support for key programming, career coaches being one of those. I think there's an opportunity to invest more resource in the K-12 system based off of the demand that we saw this year through this K-12 grant program. There may be other opportunities as well. And then we'll be asking for some gap support for our partners, not asking for Accelerate Mississippi support, but key resources to fill in gaps we've identified. One of those that's pretty obvious is the workforce house. The workforce side of the house at our community colleges has not been addressed in any increased meaningful way in decades. And so that's an area where we see a lot of opportunity for growth. If we're telling the world that this is a critical piece of the puzzle of how we're going to train our people for more opportunity, then we need to make sure that they're properly resourced to do that at a high level. Another area is the adult education side of the house at our community college partners, which if we're talking labor force participation rate and how we're going to move the needle with adults who are not working, then we've got to properly support our partners who do a good job of wrapping their arms around those individuals and make sure they've got what they need to impact more Mississippians. And with that, I'll hand it over again.
So I know our time is waning, and I want to make sure that we've have opportunity to engage in questions, should you have any. And certainly, as Garrett had explained, we are happy to come and sit down at long length, and in fact, would welcome that, because I think it is these are complex topics, and certainly we want to make sure that we've answered all your questions, heard your concerns, and also your ideas as to how we can do this better. It will be almost 3 years ago this April that I took on this job. I've been in this position now almost 3 years, and there is no doubt that I was tasked with creating a vision for what this office might look like and how it might live up to the mandate that you have given us, the expectations that you set for us in law, and casting that vision in a way that builds consensus. And so when I look in the room and I see multiple presidents from community colleges, I see them as colleagues and partners and teammates in this, in building consensus around this vision. We were tasked with creating that vision, creating this office, building it with resources based upon, again, wise counsel from David Parker and others, Senator Parker, and helping to equip us with the right resources that we needed to grow and move closer to seeing this vision become a reality. And then having programmatic stability and stabilizing what we do. Again, we are tasked with creating an environment where we can encourage more Mississippians to take steps towards pathways that lead to good jobs, higher paying jobs, high trajectory earning careers. So when through creation and build out, and now to the point where I feel like we're beginning to see the beginning stages of stabilizing these programs, we are excited to continue to move toward living up to the mandate and the expectation. We do that through our workforce triage efforts of identifying immediate opportunities and needs that Courtney and Garrett had addressed and enumerated. We do that through our horizon thinking. What are we doing now to lay the predicate and the structure and infrastructure to ensure that we are ready for opportunities when they come in the future? Our career coaches that you all have walked alongside us with in building that program, deploying that. That is an example of horizon thinking. We will continue to push for those efforts. And now the third leg of that stool, the idea of developing a fast deployed, customizable training mechanism for economic development projects when either existing industries in Mississippi decide they want to grow and they need assistance in strategy developed for workforce to meet their needs, or we have new industries that are coming and have specific and unique needs that we can address through the resources over which you give us responsibility. These are the things that we're tasked with doing. There are still obstacles ahead, and I will just quickly enumerate these before we conclude and yield to questions. Complacency is one of those. In our office, they get tired of me saying the word Kaizen, which is the Japanese word for continuous improvement. We are never done improving. We are never done getting better at what we do. We might do things well programmatically. There's always a way to do them better. There's always a way to do them more efficiently and effectively, and we cannot be complacent or find ourselves in a state of stasis where we are standing still. We must continue to challenge ourselves and move forward. As Garrett enumerated, we do have barriers to tracking and measuring results by trying to cobble together systems that don't speak really easily to one another. They're old systems that were in place for some time and generations that maybe served their purposes well at one point in time, but now we need to have those systems much more unified, streamlined, and focused together in a way that we can draw information quickly, accurately, and with great trust that we are basing our decisions on sound information. And then an unwillingness to meet individuals in their circumstance. One of the, I think, wonderful aspects of our ecosystem approach is that we understand that in Philadelphia, Mississippi, there are challenges and opportunities that are different than what we find in Greenville. So understanding that we have to meet Mississippians where they are, deploying resources in an effective way that can help them overcome obstacles to gain access to those pathways, we have to be willing to do that, and we have to collectively be willing to do that. And then a fatigue that might set in. As I said in the initial days of taking on this role, we did not get into this situation overnight. We will not get out of it overnight. It requires time, patience, and the good Lord's giving us the perseverance that we need to see this through. So help me so that we don't become fatigued, that we continue to move forward and seek out that continuous improvement. You gave us a broad mandate. You gave us great expectation. We want to rise to meet that expectation. And we certainly want to do that with you. So at this time, we'll certainly yield and entertain any questions the committee has.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Appreciate the presentation from everyone. Obviously, there's been a lot of work done over the last few years, and I look forward to the comprehensive report coming out. And that's kind of part of the first part of this hearing, was to really identify where we can move the needle. We get caught up in percentages sometimes and not people. I like raw numbers because every number means somebody. That's somebody's mama, somebody's daddy, somebody's child. So I don't want to chase percentages as much as I want to change lives. Now, some of the issue that I have heard already in both these presentations is childcare. And I think there will be some attempts to address these things. There's a lot of tools maybe that the state can use, but childcare has generally been considered a low wage job. Since we're having trouble finding childcare for people who are trying to pursue a higher wage job, I want to make sure that we don't have a mandate in our training that we overlook childcare people being trained just because their wage is not high. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Understood.
What, if any, direction or opportunity have you seen in the childcare market from Accelerate standpoint?
Well, I will certainly, and I'm happy to yield to any of my colleagues who have some perspective on it. I will tell you that the issue of childcare is usually one of the top 3 items that employers regularly communicate to us as being an obstacle that their employees face. And I know Senator Boyd had us participate in a hearing a year and a half ago almost now to talk about that being a very real challenge. And it's a 2-part challenge. The idea that we need to have more people engaging in the practice of providing childcare, understanding that it is a low-wage industry, but also the lack of availability of non-traditional hour childcare. So it's a multifaceted, problem that we're facing. We certainly, I would say, don't have the authority to make effectuate significant change through the mechanisms or the resources we have. But we absolutely have a say and certainly believe that strategy has to be developed to address that, because it is a top concern from our industry partners.
Well, and let me be a little more specific. I may not have said that well. When Accelerate took over, and we know you had to take a while to get your arms around things, there was a dynamic change as it related to rates of pay of particular jobs receiving attention or being approved for a project. I'm just trying to make the point that childcare seems to be a barrier to upskill our people. Let us not overlook the training of childcare professionals, even if they're low paid jobs.
Understood.
Because it actually is the cross benefit of being upskilled.
Loud and clear. I will say too that we have regular communication and conversation with other state agencies that have more of a direct purview over some benefits and resources that are made available to help people overcome some of those challenges. But we're also seeing private industry start to step into the game, which is, I think, a wonderful trend that you see groups like Toyota who are looking at providing a much more affordable childcare, employing childcare providers maybe at a much higher wage than you would see in other area childcare providers in the Blue Springs, Tupelo area. So we're seeing some trends where the private industry is stepping in to help address some of that, but we stand ready to continue to commit that conversation to find solutions through our means.
A question I get from time to time is when we have announcements of these economic development projects, which we're excited always about, that there are customizable trainings, things that you guys will step up to participate with. Of course, then there are also the industries in that particular area that have been working with us for years and years who may have some of their employment cannibalized. What, if any, response does Accelerate have in an area where, let's even say in the Columbus area where we have Aluminum Dynamics coming on, or are we looking at the other industries in that area?
Sure. I think it's very important for the committee to understand the ripple effect that often comes from a large announcement like what we saw last week or what we've seen with SDI. There is no doubt that establishing strong relationships, building trust with existing industries so that when those announcements come, they understand that we stand just as ready to help serve them to ensure that that ripple effect is mitigated, or at least whatever detrimental experience they might have as a result of a large company moving in, that we're thinking through developing strategies specific to them as well. So the customizable training approach is not just for the new shiny object coming into town. It's also to those existing industries that we walk through to determine when you're impacted, not if you're impacted, but when you're impacted. Here are some strategies that we think you need to employ. And here are some resources through our community colleges and K-12 partners, through our career coaches that might maximize the likelihood that that number that may walk across the street to the new bright shiny object is dealt with in a way that you see growth as well. So in Columbus in particular, we have strong relationships with some of the private industries there already. We regularly, through our ecosystem coordinators and even through some of the staff in our Jackson office, talk with the group, the family-owned organizations and companies that are part of Forge. They stay in continuous conversation with us about a lot of those ripple effects from SDI and other companies that are growing. We participate in some of their expo events where we're trying to help grow participation from junior high and high school students to understand the opportunities that exist within those existing industries. And likewise, we already have a meeting on the books for North Mississippi with existing industry in Marshall County to ensure that they understand we're right there with them, ready to help them when those ripple effects do take place.
Thank you. I'm going to see if you have any questions from the committee. Senator Suber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask about your career coaches. I know it's a very young program and you might not have much data that you could share with us, but you said you had 177 current career coaches. You're needing up to 240. How effective have these career coaches been with getting students going in the right area? I know I've talked to quite a few career coaches. I had a couple students I've met with, kind of interested in politics or possibly being an attorney or something. But how effective, to your knowledge, have the career coaches been with helping these kids?
So I'd be happy to provide some updated statistics. We have a dashboard that's available through our system that will show you up to this day the number of interactions with students. I think it's far surpassing 2,000 at this point interactions, which are defined as individual one-on-one student interactions with coaches, group interactions, coaches interacting with parents, industries coming into classroom, and then also field trips where students are going to some of the area industries. So it surpasses 2,000 at this point into the program. Now, in terms of being able to quantify the number of students who have left high school and made connection points in either a community college program, four-year institution, or directly into that industry partner, we're still a little bit of ways from being able to provide that data. But in terms of the sheer volume, you're starting to see that number go up. And what we're recognizing, and please understand, feel good stories feel good. But to Chairman Sparks' understanding, not getting lost in the statistics and data is still important. So wanting to make sure that we see valuable stories coming from students making those connections, but also backing it up that we're seeing that data-driven approach of making sure that we're deploying coaches in the right places, and we're seeing more students make their way across the street to some of those career.
And any of the students that you've met with or talked to, I mean, have they had a good outlook on meeting with the coaches, or is it something they just could live without?
Yes, sir. For the most part, I have heard nothing but glowing comments, obviously from the student's perspective, whereas in the past, not because of any lack of desire from the school or from their guidance counselors, just sheer volume of work that they have being thrown at them at this point, just having someone shepherd them through the process of understanding all the options that are available to them, whether it's going directly into the workforce or choosing or selecting a career path through an educational mechanism that they might not have otherwise had. We have heard great responses from students who have excitement, whether they're going into nursing. I've heard some for truck driving. I've also heard, I'm an attorney, so I've tried to dissuade as many students from going into the practice of law.
understand that.
And Chairman Sparks understands what I mean, but students who are excited about pursuing those careers as well. So we've gotten great responses from the students, and I've also been able to really enjoy the interactions that the coaches have been able to tell us about and illustrate what they see in the students that they interact with.
Well, and there's 12 million a year for the 177 coaches. How much more funding would be needed to get up to the 240? I mean, roughly.
Yeah.
It's gonna be 20 to 25 million. We've got all that broken down.
What we would like to do is provide you, this is how many more coaches you would have for this amount, and this is how many more coaches you would have for this amount. And for this amount, the entirety of the state could have access to at least one career coach. In some communities, we know they're going to need more coaches just by the sheer volume of students that they encounter each day. So we would rather give you a list that you can discern through, plus having some of the data and some of the just the numerical value, so you understand that these dollars are not just going into a black hole. They are providing some statistical
Well, and
value.
I'd like to see that.
Yes, sir.
when you get it.
Understood.
Thank
Be
you.
happy to provide that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions from any other members? Sure. How could I turn down my desk mate, Senator Boyd? Senator Boyd, you are recognized for a question.
I'm not on this committee, but I appreciate it. Tell me what the SWIB board identifies as priority sectors.
So certainly, and I have Patrick Sullivan here, who is the chairman of the SWIB, the State Workforce Investment Board. Essentially, we work with them and we look at the data provided through SLDS on those industry sectors that have the largest gaps or the largest numerical need, and also our careers and jobs that pay above, say, the median household income in different ecosystems. So we establish some of our priority sectors by looking at that data and having direction from the SWIB board made up of business and industry representatives who see these sectors and recognize this is where we need to be focusing our efforts, maximizing the likelihood that more students would be able to find access to those careers. And we also work with our friends at the Department of Education, the Community College Board, understanding some of the data that they are providing to identify those sectors as well.
Just to kind of reiterate what Chairman Sparks said, is my understanding that I have gotten data from lots of education groups or whatever, is that the childcare is not part of that priority sector. Is that correct?
So
The board has not considered it part of that priority
that is
sector.
currently not a sector that we would say is a targeted sector. Those jobs that we would say pay above that median household income, understanding they are important, but that certainly is one that we're focusing on other sectors at this time.
Okay. I would ask you to go back and challenge your board on this, because here's the problem. If we cannot have quality childcare, people cannot grow in those sector jobs that are high wage earning. And I hear it from my industry over and over and over again. And we have industries, as I've stated repeatedly, that have some of the highest female workforces of any, they're national companies, but their Mississippi companies have the highest percentage of female workers. If you go into those industries, the number one thing they ask us to do is help them with childcare. So I think we may be missing the forest for the trees in this, and I would ask that y'all go back and relook at this issue.
We will certainly be happy to entertain that and have that discussion and even, bring that up to the board, obviously. Did y'all have a?
I was just going to say that the state strategy document that's been referenced that's coming out, the way we've tried to address that, because especially with the federal funding where the priority sectors have mostly come through the product of WIOA and the WIOA local plans, their wage sort of thresholds and they're not hard thresholds, but they pretty quickly eliminate things like childcare and other really important things. And so the state strategy document that we're working on contemplates those priority areas, which do really lean in on the wage issue. But then we're also contemplating what we call community serving occupations that are important, but don't meet those wage thresholds. So I do think that we're going to hopefully have some nuance in this strategy that allows people to recognize that we're not diminishing the importance of these occupations. We're saying the specific funds that we've been given authority over do have restrictions, and so we're working within those frameworks.
And I'll just add, Senator, loud and clear. There's no doubt we will continue to have that conversation and a much more pointed conversation. We're also very willing and open to work with our other sister agencies and entities that do have resources that might be better and more appropriately situated to help where that's concerned, that we can use funding sources in a way that's complementary to one another. But suffice it to say, the conversation, we will have that, and I'll report back to you on that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Boyd. Kind of as a wrap up, and I want to end this on time. I appreciate everyone participating. I appreciate the report too on a breakdown of the community colleges. Obviously, they're a key part of education in the state of Mississippi. In addition to talking about the lump sum amount of funding that each community college receives, I don't think that's been adjusted in several years, and certainly it's more expensive to do anything, but in the job training aspect. And then for the future, and I know you will, and I know you haven't had enough time for this data, but we did talk about this prior, is with our career coaches, seeing those outcomes, because, your WEP funds are about 20 million a year, and your ask on career coaches is about 20 million a year. Those are big numbers. I think they're making big impacts, but earlier, I guess, in the conversation with the state economist, I'm not happy with the workforce participation rate because whatever the metrics are, we're 50th. So I'm not happy, but I'm also not happy that that number properly defines what our workforce looks like, because I think underemployed people are overcounted. We have some issues with it, but with our career coaches, we very well may see industry being filled with bright minds and bright people who are excited to be in that industry, that do not languish for a period of time and then have to be retrained, but they can always upskill. So I'm excited about the program, but as we're able to track and provide data, the better. So
Loud and clear.
thank you so much for your presentation today, and I know you've been very gracious to take time, answer questions, and will continue to. Any members of the committee that have questions, certainly you guys stand ready to answer. So thank you so much, and with that, I will entertain a motion. Rise and report. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. One thing, I'm sorry, we can still rise and report. For members of the committee and House Committee, and I think Chairman Bell may have left, but there is a tour at Nissan. I think many of you are invited. I just want to remind you of that. I think it's 11 to 1. But if you have any questions about that, we'll get that answered. Thank you.